Bosco Campus Vision. This is Danny Thomas, Research Scholar, University of Kerala. So, the last video I have explained to you the introduction to econometrics, and in that I have defined econometrics. I have also discussed the need for having separate discipline, the methodology of econometrics, the classification of econometrics, and the structure of economic data. So, starting with this video, I will be trying to break down the topics that were covered in the previous lecture. And I will begin with the methodology of econometrics. And to make it more understandable, I will be using the Keynesian theory of consumption as an example to explain the steps involved in methodology of econometrics. So, in this video, I will be explaining to you the first two steps of the methodology, that is statement of theory or hypothesis and specification of mathematical model to the theory. So let's start with the first step, that is statement of theory or hypothesis. Now, what do you mean by statement of theory or hypothesis? Statement of theory or hypothesis simply means to establish a relationship between the two variables under the study. When we undertake a study, we will be having two variables, and it is important to establish a relationship between the two. And statement of theory means to establish a relationship between the dependent and independent variables, or in simple terms you can say it is a definition of problem under study. Now, coming to our example of consumption theory, let us see how Keynes have established a relationship between the variables in that study. So, Keynesian theory of consumption states that men or women are disposed as a rule and on an average to increase the consumption expenditure as the income increases, but not as much as the increase in income. Okay, now what does it mean? It means the marginal propensity to consumption is greater than 0 but less than 1. Now, what do you mean by this marginal propensity to consumption? Marginal propensity to consumption simply means the rate of change in consumption expenditure caused due to a per unit change in income. Say, for example, 1 rupee change in income. Now, why do you say that the marginal propensity to consumption is greater than 0 and less than 1? As per the definition, the change in consumption will not be more than the change in income. So, if income increases by 1 rupee, the resulting change in consumption expenditure will not be more than 1. So that's why we say marginal propensity to consumption is less than 1 but greater than 0. So this is an example of stating the theory. Here Keynes have established a relationship between the variables consumption and income, and this is how we state the theory or hypothesis. So in order to state a theory, you will have to define the problem, you will have to establish a relationship, and you will have add some points to make it more clear and more understandable. Okay, so now that we have seen the statement of theory, we will move on to the next step, that is specification of mathematical model to the theory. In our example, the theory is about consumption. So we will be creating a mathematical model for the theory of consumption. Now, in the theory, it does not explain, it does not give any mathematical relationship between the variables. So it is important to create a mathematical relationship between the two. For that, we will have to develop a mathematical model. So we will be using a So in order to create a mathematical relationship, we will be using a simple regression equation to develop a mathematical model, and that equation will be y is equal to beta 1 plus beta 2x. Here beta 2 will be greater than 0 but less than 1. Y will represent consumption expenditure and x will represent income. Now, what are these beta 1 and beta 2? Beta 1 and beta 2 are parameters of the study, and they mean beta 1 means an intercept and beta 2 means slope. Now, what do you mean by the slope and intercept? Intercept means the value of y when the value of x is equal to 0. So in our example, y is consumption expenditure and x is income. So intercept means the value of consumption expenditure when income is equal to 0. Okay. Now what do you mean by slope? Slope means the average change in the variable y due to a per unit change in the variable x. So, in our example, this means the average change in consumption expenditure cost due to a per unit change in income. We know that what this is known as the marginal propensity to consumption. So we can see beta 2 or slope measures the marginal propensity to consumption. Now, this equation gives a linear relationship between the two variables, and this is an example for a mathematical model, and you can call it as consumption function in economics. So, to develop a mathematical model means to formulate a mathematical equation. That is a simple meaning of specification of mathematical model. If you are having only one equation in your model, then you can call your model as a single equation model. And if you're having more than one equations, you can call it as a multiple equation model. And in an equation, the variables that comes to the left of the equation, the left hand side of the equality sign, is known as a dependent variable, and the variable that comes to the right hand side of the equality sign is known as independent variable or explanatory variable. In our equation, y comes to the left and x comes to the right. Now we know what y represents and x represents. Y represents consumption expenditure and x represents income of the consumers. So here consumption expenditure is a dependent variable and income is an independent variable or an explanatory variable. So this is a simple way of developing a mathematical equation for a theory. So we have seen how to develop a theory and how to develop a mathematical model for that theory. The rest of the steps and methodology will be continued in the upcoming videos. Until then, bye bye and thank you for watching the video.